Hello there, and welcome. I'm so glad you could join me tonight. Find a comfortable spot, and let's journey together for a little while. Our story tonight begins in a place of myth and fire, a land that feels both ancient and as if it was born only yesterday. We're going to a place that inspired one of literature's most beautiful and hopeful creations, the Cordial of Miruvor from Middle-earth. But like all good myths, this one has its roots in something real, a humble, tenacious and quietly beautiful organism known as Iceland moss. Before we delve into the life of this incredible lichen, however, we must first understand the world that forged it. We have to go back to the very beginning, to the creation of the stage upon which our story unfolds. If you enjoy what we do here, this quiet exploration of the natural world, do consider liking the video or subscribing. It lets me know that these stories are finding a home. And as always, I love to see where everyone is listening from. It's a wonderful thought, this quiet community spread all across the globe, listening together in the dark. So feel free to leave a comment with your city or country. But for now, all of that can wait. The world outside, with all its noise and its demands, can fade away. It's time to prepare for rest. So dim the lights, settle in and get comfortable. Let your shoulders relax and let the weight of the day fall away. Take a slow, deep breath. And another. Let's travel not across space, but through time, to witness the birth of an island at the top of the world. Chapter 1. Forging the Canvas. The birth of the Icelandic Highlands. Our story doesn't begin with life. It begins with geology. It begins with the raw, elemental forces that shape a world. To understand the delicate, resilient Iceland moss, we must first appreciate the violence and the patience that created its home. We must travel to the Icelandic Highlands, a landscape that is less a place on a map and more a testament to the planet's relentless creative power. Imagine, if you will, the Earth not as a solid, static ball of rock, but as something dynamic, something breathing on a time scale that defies our human comprehension. Its skin, the crust, is not a single seamless shell, but a mosaic of immense, interlocking plates. These are the tectonic plates, and they are adrift on a sea of molten rock, the mantle. They float, they drift, they collide, and in some places they pull apart. And it is in one of these places, a place of separation, that our story is born. Deep beneath the cold, dark waters of the Atlantic Ocean, there is a scar, a seam that runs the length of the globe from the Arctic to the Antarctic. This is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. It is the place where two of the planet's great plates, the North American plate and the Eurasian plate, are slowly, inexorably pulling away from each other. Think of it as a wound on the Earth's surface that never heals because it is constantly being pulled open. The gap widens by about an inch every year, roughly the same speed at which your fingernails grow. It's a movement so slow as to be imperceptible to us, yet over millions of years it is a force that can build continents and birth oceans. From this wound, this great undersea rift, the Earth bleeds. Molten rock, magma, wells up from the mantle below to fill the void. It meets the frigid, crushing pressure of the deep ocean, and it solidifies, creating new crust, new sea floor. Most of this incredible act of creation happens in the silent, perpetual darkness of the abyss, unseen and unheard. But Iceland is different. Iceland is the exception. It is the one place on Earth where this colossal submarine mountain range, this engine of planetary creation, breaches the surface of the waves. And the reason for this is a second, equally powerful geological force at play. Deep beneath this seam in the crust, there is what geologists call a mantle plume, or a hotspot. Imagine a giant, sustained blowtorch fixed in the Earth's mantle, pointing straight up. For tens of millions of years, this plume of exceptionally hot rock has been rising from the deep Earth, pushing upward against the crust. This hotspot acts as an accomplice to the rifting. As the plates pull apart, this plume provides a superabundance of molten material, a seemingly endless supply of fuel. The result is a frenzy of volcanic activity, building and building upon itself, layer after layer, eruption after eruption, until finally about 20 million years ago, this growing submarine mountain pushed its head above the waves and took its first breath of air. This was the birth of Iceland. So when you look at a map of Iceland, you are not just seeing an island. You are seeing a physical manifestation of the planet's inner workings. You are seeing the mid-Atlantic ridge made visible, a place where you can literally stand with one foot on the North American continent and the other in Europe as the land itself splits beneath you. It is a geological infant, one of the youngest land masses on Earth, and it is still growing, still being shaped by the two immense forces that created it, the pulling apart of the plates and the pushing up of the plume. This is the foundation. This is the raw material. Now, let's zoom in. Let's leave the planetary scale behind and stand on this nascent land. What would we see? What would we feel? We would find ourselves in a world of fire. The story of the Icelandic Highlands is written in lava, not just one kind of eruption, but a whole vocabulary of volcanic expression. Perhaps the most iconic and landscape-defining of these are the fissure eruptions. These don't come from a single conical mountain peak. Instead, the ground itself splits open. A crack, sometimes miles long, appears in the earth, and from this fissure, a curtain of fire erupts into the sky. It's not an explosion in the way we might imagine, but a tremendous sustained fountaining of incandescent rock. Imagine a line of fire stretching to the horizon, a wall of liquid light roaring into the sky, sometimes hundreds of feet high. The sound is not a bang, but a deep, continuous, visceral roar, the sound of the planet releasing its internal pressure. From these curtains of fire, rivers of lava pour out across the land. This isn't the slow, creeping lava you might see in some documentaries. This is often incredibly fluid, flowing like water, filling valleys, surrounding hills, and spreading out in vast, dark sheets. These are the events that build the great lava fields, the Orðaharan, or evil deeds lava, as some are called in Icelandic folklore. They can last for months, even years, relentlessly resurfacing the world, burying everything that came before under a new layer of black rock. Let's imagine watching one of these flows from a safe distance. The air shimmers with heat. The smell is acrid, sharp, a mix of sulfur and hot stone. At night, the landscape is illuminated by this flowing arterial red. You can see the crust of the flow begin to cool and darken, forming a skin, while the molten river continues to move beneath it. You can hear the strange symphony of its cooling, the crackle and tinkle of solidifying rock, the hiss of steam where it meets wet ground, the deep grinding sound of the flow's solidifying front being pushed forward by the liquid pressure from behind. When these vast flows finally come to a rest and cool over years and decades, they leave behind a truly alien landscape. They create the two primary types of lava surfaces we find in the highlands. There is the Pahoho lava, a name of Hawaiian origin. This forms when the lava is very fluid. As it cools, the surface forms a skin that wrinkles and folds as the liquid beneath it continues to move, creating a landscape of smooth, ropey, undulating textures. It can look like coiled ropes or folds of drapery, or the wrinkled skin of a giant creature. It is strange, but often navigable. And then there is its opposite, the R lava. This forms from a more viscous, slower-moving flow. As it cools, the crust is broken up into a chaotic jumble of sharp, jagged and porous fragments called clinker. To walk on an R field is to traverse a landscape of endless, unstable black rubble. Every step is a careful negotiation with sharp edges. It is a treacherous, difficult terrain that can shred boots and punish any misstep. The silence in these fields is profound. There is no soil, no plants, just the endless, dark, chaotic sea of frozen rock. This is the first layer of our canvas, a vast expanse of black, raw, sterile stone. But the fissures are not the only architects. There are the shield volcanoes, vast and gentle giants. Unlike the dramatic, explosive cones we often picture, these volcanoes are built up over thousands of years by countless successive flows of very fluid lava. The result is not a steep mountain, but a broad, gently sloping dome, resembling a warrior's shield laid on the ground. They speak not of a single violent event, but of a deep, patient and persistent process. Each layer, a few feet thick, represents a single eruption, a single pulse from the Earth's heart, laid down one on top of the other, building a foundation of immense stability and size. And then, there is the most dramatic and uniquely Icelandic form of creation, the dance between fire and ice. For most of its history, Iceland has been subject to the great ice ages. Much of the island was buried under a colossal ice sheet, thousands of feet thick. But the volcanic heart of the island did not stop beating. The hotspot continued to burn beneath the ice. So, what happens when a volcano erupts beneath a glacier? The result is a battle of titanic forces. The immense heat of the magma instantly melts the ice above it, creating a vast cavern of water and steam within the glacier. The pressure builds and builds until it becomes explosive. The superheated water flashes into steam, fragmenting the magma into fine particles of volcanic ash and glass. This is a phreatomagmatic eruption, a violent steam-driven explosion that can blast a column of black ash miles into the atmosphere. If the eruption is sustained, it will eventually melt its way through the entire thickness of the glacier. A lake will form on the glacier's surface, contained by walls of ice, with a volcanic island fuming in its center. The lava that erupts into this lake cools incredibly quickly, shattering and piling up on itself, forming steep-sided mountains of a rock called hyaloclastite, a chaotic jumble of glassy fragments and pillow lavas. When the ice age finally ends and the glaciers retreat, these unique mountains are left behind. They are called tuyas, or table mountains, flat-topped, steep-sided volcanoes that were born in cavities within the ice. They are geological ghosts, their shape a perfect cast of the void in the glacier that they once filled. They stand on the highland plains today as solitary, geometric monuments to this incredible conflict between fire and ice. The water from these subglacial eruptions has to go somewhere, and this leads to one of the most powerful and landscape-altering phenomena on Earth, the Jökulhlaup, or glacial outburst flood. As the volcano melts the ice, a massive lake of meltwater can build up, trapped behind an ice dam or within the glacier itself. Eventually the pressure becomes too great, or the dam fails. The result is the sudden catastrophic release of an entire lake. This is not a flood in any normal sense of the word. It is a torrent of biblical proportions, a wall of water, ice and rock, sometimes with a flow rate greater than the Amazon River, comes roaring out from under the glacier's edge. It carries icebergs the size of houses and boulders the size of cars. It has the power to carve canyons in a matter of hours, to move entire deltas, to completely re-sculpt the land in front of it. These Jökulhlaups are the great reset button of the Icelandic landscape. They are a force of unimaginable power, scouring the land down to the bedrock, leaving behind vast plains of sand and gravel, known as sanders. So, let us pause and take stock of the canvas we have so far. Through the patient work of shield volcanoes and the dramatic outpourings of fissure eruptions, we have a foundation of black basalt. Through the violent interaction of fire and ice, we have solitary flat-topped mountains and vast plains of flood-scoured gravel and sand. The land is barren, it is raw, it is a world of primary colors, the black of the rock, the white of the distant ice caps, the grey of the ash, and the deep blue of a subarctic sky. It is a landscape defined by fire, but that is only half of the story. For as the fire builds, another, colder force is at work, sculpting, grinding, and refining this raw creation. This is the age of ice. For much of the last 2.5 million years, the Earth's climate has oscillated in and out of long glacial periods. During these times, the ice caps at the poles expanded dramatically. Iceland, due to its location, was completely inundated. An ice sheet, thousands of feet thick, smothered the entire island, burying all but the very highest peaks, which poked through the ice as lonely islands known as nunataks. It is almost impossible for us to conceive of the weight of this ice. The pressure at the base of the glacier was immense, capable of crushing rock, and this ice was not static. driven by its own weight and the subtle slope of the land beneath. It flowed. The glaciers were rivers of ice, moving with an excruciating slowness, but with a force that was utterly irresistible. As these glaciers flowed, they became the world's greatest sculptors. They were armed with the rock and debris frozen into their base, turning them into a kind of colossal planetary-scale sandpaper. They scoured and polished the bedrock beneath them, smoothing the rough edges of the lava fields, leaving behind long linear scratches in the stone, called striations, that show the direction of the ice's ancient flow. They plucked and quarried massive blocks of rock from the mountainsides, carrying them for miles before dropping them in altogether different landscapes when the ice finally melted. These lonely, out-of-place boulders are called glacial erratics, and they dot the Icelandic Highlands today, silent witnesses to the time when the land was in motion. The glaciers carved the very shape of the mountains and valleys. A valley carved by a river tends to be V-shaped, as the water cuts down into the center, but a valley carved by a glacier is different. The ice fills the entire valley from wall to wall, and it grinds away at the sides as much as the bottom. The result is a classic U-shaped valley, broad, flat-bottomed, with steep, almost vertical sides. They are troughs of immense scale, carved by a force that moved with the patience of geology itself. They carved deep, dramatic fjords along the coastlines, and they sharpened mountain peaks into jagged horns and array. The ice was a subtractive force, where the volcanoes added mass to the island, the glaciers took it away, grinding mountains into dust and carrying the sediment out to sea. This dance between creation and destruction, between fire and ice, is the fundamental rhythm of Iceland's history. The volcanoes build the land up, and the glaciers grind it back down. Then, about 10,000 years ago, the last great ice age began to wane. The climate warmed, and the great ice sheet began to retreat. This was not a gentle melting. It was a messy, dynamic, and dramatic process. As the glaciers shrank, they left behind all the rock and debris they had been carrying. They deposited vast, hummocky ridges of this material, called moraines, which marked the furthest extent of the ice. The melting ice released unbelievable quantities of water. For a time, the landscape was dominated by raging sediment-choked rivers flowing from the snouts of the dying glaciers, creating even more of those vast outwash plains, the sanders. The land itself, released from the crushing weight of the ice, began to rebound, rising slowly in a process called isostatic uplift, a deep sigh of relief from the planet's crust. And as the ice pulled back, it revealed the new land beneath. It was a world scraped clean, a blank slate. The soils that had existed before were gone, scoured away and washed out to sea. What was left was a raw mineral landscape, the bedrock of basalt, the fields of jagged lava, the plains of sand and gravel, the moraines of unsorted glacial till. This is the canvas we have been forging, a vast, empty, and profoundly beautiful wilderness. It is a land of immense horizons, where the scale is set not by trees or buildings, but by volcanoes and glaciers. The air is so clear and clean that distances are deceptive. A mountain that looks a short walk away might be a full day's hike. Let's stand now, in our minds, in the center of the Icelandic Highlands as the last of the great glaciers has retreated. The age of fire and ice has done its primary work. We are surrounded by a landscape of profound silence. There are no trees to rustle in the wind. There are no songbirds. There is only the sound of the wind itself, a constant, unimpeded presence flowing over the low, rolling hills and the dark, empty plains. It is a lonely, haunting sound. The ground beneath our feet is not soil as we know it. It is a chaotic mix of volcanic material. There is tephra, the general term for all the fragmented material ejected by a volcano. This includes fine volcanic ash, which can be carried by the wind for hundreds of miles, blanketing the landscape in a layer of grey or black dust. There are larger fragments like lapilli, the size of pebbles, and volcanic bombs, larger chunks of molten rock that solidified as they flew through the air. This volcanic soil is, in one sense, incredibly rich. It is full of the essential minerals needed for life: phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium. It's a pantry stocked with all the raw ingredients. However, it is missing two key components. First, it lacks structure. It is often loose, unconsolidated, and easily moved by wind and water. Second, and most critically, it lacks organic matter. It has no nitrogen, no humus, no history of past life to enrich it. It is sterile. It is a mineral desert. For any life to take hold here, it must be a pioneer. It must be an organism that can survive on next to nothing. It must be able to anchor itself against the relentless wind. It must be able to withstand the incredible temperature swings of a subarctic climate. And it must be able to create its own nourishment from sunlight, air, water, and the raw minerals of the volcanic rock itself. This brings us to the final sculptor of our canvas, the climate. The Icelandic Highlands are defined by their harshness. They sit in the path of the North Atlantic storm tracks, meaning they are subject to some of the most ferocious and unpredictable weather on the planet. The wind is a constant force of erosion, a physical presence that shapes every aspect of the ecosystem. It picks up the fine volcanic sand and ash, creating scouring dust storms that can strip paint from a car. Any plant that hopes to survive here must grow low to the ground, hugging the surface for protection. There is a saying in Iceland: if you get lost in an Icelandic forest, just stand up. It's a joke about the fact that the native forests are often composed of dwarf birch and willow that grow only a few feet high, perpetually pruned by the wind. The temperatures are extreme. In winter, the highlands are buried under deep snow, and temperatures can plummet far below freezing for months on end. The ground freezes solid. For any organism, this is a long period of enforced dormancy, a state of suspended animation. Then comes the short, intense summer. The snow melts, often revealing a waterlogged and unstable ground, and with the summer comes the light. Because of its high latitude, Iceland experiences the extremes of daylight. In the peak of summer, the sun barely dips below the horizon. For weeks there is the midnight sun, a period of near-continuous daylight. This is a time of frantic activity for any life that exists here. It is a short, precious window to photosynthesize, to grow, to reproduce. The sun circles the sky, and the landscape is bathed in a perpetual golden twilight. Then, as autumn approaches, the days shorten rapidly, leading to the deep winter, where the sun may only appear for a few hours, a low, weak arc in the southern sky. This cycle of light and dark, feast and famine, is another fundamental rhythm that governs life in the highlands. So this is the world we have built, a world born of the earth's internal fire, where continents are torn asunder, a world scoured and carved by the immense, patient power of ice, a world of black sands, jagged lava fields, and solitary geometric mountains, a world with a soil rich in minerals but devoid of life's history, and a world governed by a climate of extremes, the relentless wind, the bitter cold, and the cyclical drama of Arctic light and darkness. It seems an impossible place for life to begin. It seems almost alien, a landscape from another world, beautiful but inhospitable. It is a canvas that has been forged in violence, scraped clean by ice, and is now being weathered by a fierce and unrelenting climate. It is perfect, because it is precisely this combination of factors, the raw, mineral-rich substrate, the lack of competition from more complex plants, the clean, unpolluted air, and the abundant summer light that creates the perfect, unique niche for our protagonist. This harsh, elemental world is not an obstacle to life, it is an invitation. It is a stage waiting for the first actor to arrive, an organism that does not need the comforts of rich soil or gentle climes. It is waiting for a true pioneer, a being that is not one organism but two, living in a perfect partnership, a being that can eat rock, drink the mist, and breathe the air, a being that can settle on the barest stone of a new lava flow and begin the slow, sacred process of turning rock into soil. The canvas is ready. the immense geological work is done. The silence of the highlands is waiting to be broken, not by a loud noise, but by the quiet, persistent, and incredibly patient process of life taking its very first hold. Here, on this fresh, new and challenging surface, our story of the Iceland moss can truly begin. Chapter 2. The Kingdom in Miniature. Deconstructing Cetraria islandica. And so, our story begins, not with a sudden rush, but with the arrival of a quiet pioneer. The first thing we must do, as we settle here on the cool volcanic rock, is to gently correct a misunderstanding, a beautiful and ancient misnomer. The organism we have come to see, the one known for centuries as Iceland moss, is not in fact a moss at all. It's a common mistake, an easy one to make. It grows in dense moss-like carpets, it clings to the earth with a similar tenacity, and it shares that same feeling of ancient, damp permanence. But if we were to bring a microscope to this landscape, if we were to zoom in past the world we know, past the world of insects, and even past the world of grains of sand, we would discover a truth far more complex and far more wondrous. We would find that Iceland moss is a living paradox. It is not one life form, but two, locked in an intimate and inseparable embrace. It is a lichen. And to understand a lichen is to understand one of nature's most successful and most unlikely partnerships. It is a biological treaty, a marriage of convenience that has allowed life to conquer the most inhospitable places on Earth. Imagine, if you will, two entirely different beings from two completely separate kingdoms of life deciding to build a house together. The first partner is a fungus. In the case of Cetraria islandica, this is the dominant partner, the one that gives the lichen its shape, its texture, its very form. We call this partner the mycobiont. Think of the fungus as the architect, the engineer, and the landlord of this shared home. It is a master builder. Its body is made of countless microscopic threads, called hyphae, woven together with incredible precision. These threads form the entire structure you see and touch. They create a dense protective upper layer, a kind of rooftop called the upper cortex. This cortex is tough and leathery, designed to shield the delicate interior from the harsh ultraviolet rays of the northern sun, to slow the evaporation of precious water, and to stand firm against the relentless Icelandic wind. Beneath this roof, the fungal threads are woven more loosely, creating a spongy, airy interior called the medulla. This is the main body of the house, a labyrinth of chambers and passages that can hold onto water like a perfectly designed sponge. And at the very bottom, the fungus creates a lower cortex and extends tiny root-like structures called rhizines. These are not true roots. They do not draw nutrients from the rock. They are anchors, grappling hooks, 1,000 tiny fingers that grip the stone with unshakable resolve, holding the entire structure fast against the elements. The fungus builds the walls, the roof, the foundation. It provides the physical shelter, the stability, the fortress. But for all its architectural genius, the fungus has a fundamental problem. It cannot make its own food. It cannot eat the rock it sits upon, nor can it breathe in the sunlight and turn it into energy. It has built a magnificent, empty house. It needs a tenant. And that is where the second partner comes in. Nestled just below that protective upper cortex, suspended within the fungal scaffolding like precious jewels, lives a population of single-celled algae. This partner is called the photobiont. In our little house analogy, the alga is the resident gardener, the live-in chef, the power plant in the basement. It belongs to a world of microscopic green life, a world that understands the ancient and profound magic of photosynthesis. The alga can do the one thing the fungus cannot. It can take sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide from the air, and through a quiet, miraculous chemical reaction, it can create sugars. It can create energy from light. So, here is the pact. Here is the treaty that defines every lichen on Earth. The fungus, the mycobiont, provides the house. It offers a safe, stable home, protected from drying out too quickly, shielded from damaging radiation, and anchored securely to the world. In exchange for this shelter, the alga, the photobiont, photosynthesizes. It works tirelessly, day after day, turning sunlight into life, and it pays rent. A significant portion of the sugars it creates, sometimes as much as 90%, is given to its fungal landlord. The fungus sips this energy, using it to maintain its structure, to grow its threads, and to expand the shared home. It is one of the most perfect and enduring examples of symbiosis. The architect and the gardener living together in a single body. One provides the physical form, the other provides the energetic soul. Without the fungus, the delicate alga would be scoured from the rock by the first strong wind, or baked dry by an hour of direct sun. Without the alga, the fungus would simply starve, a magnificent but lifeless structure. Together they become something more than the sum of their parts. They become a lichen, a composite organism capable of living where neither could survive alone. They can live on the barest stone, the bark of a tree, an old wooden fence, and in the case of Cetraria islandica, on the vast, open and nutrient-poor volcanic highlands of the North Atlantic. Now, let's look closer at our specific lichen, at this kingdom in miniature. Cetraria islandica doesn't look like the flat, crusty lichens you might see on a gravestone. It has a more complex, three-dimensional form. It is what we call a fruticose lichen, meaning it's shrubby, branching and erect. If you were to lie down on the ground, your eyes level with its world, it would look like a miniature, alien forest. The body, which we call a thallus, is flattened and strap-like, curling at the edges to form gentle tubes and scrolls. It branches and rebranches, creating a chaotic, beautiful thicket that stands only a few inches tall. The color is a subtle and beautiful thing. It's a range of olive green to a soft, grayish brown, sometimes with a reddish tinge at the base. When it is dry, it is incredibly brittle. If you were to handle it, it would crumble into fragments with a sound like dry autumn leaves. The texture is like old parchment, stiff and unyielding. It appears dormant, almost lifeless, a husk of what it once was. But this is just an illusion. This is its state of quiet patience. Now, imagine a mist rolling in from the coast, or a gentle northern rain beginning to fall. Watch what happens. As the first drops of water touch the dry thallus, the transformation begins. The color deepens, becoming a richer, more vibrant olive. The texture softens, from brittle parchment to pliable leather. The curled edges unfurl slightly, as if the whole organism is taking a deep, slow breath. This is the magic of poikilohydry, a trait all lichens share. It means they have no internal mechanism to control their water content. They are entirely at the mercy of the environment. When it is dry, they are dry. When it is wet, they are wet. And their entire metabolism, their very state of being, is tied to this cycle. In its dry, brittle state, the lichen is in suspended animation. The algal partner shuts down photosynthesis. The fungal partner ceases all growth. It is simply waiting. It can wait for a very long time, weeks, months, even years in some species. It is a state of profound resilience, a way to endure the most extreme droughts. Then, with the return of water, the whole system awakens. Within minutes, the machinery of life restarts. The algal cells, now rehydrated, begin to capture photons of light. The quiet hum of photosynthesis resumes, the sugars begin to flow again, and the fungus receives its life-sustaining rent. The entire kingdom, which just moments before was a sleeping, brittle husk, is now awake, alive, and at work. This ability to simply switch off is the key to its survival in the Icelandic Highlands, a place of punishing extremes. In the winter, temperatures can plummet far below freezing. A normal water-filled plant cell would freeze, the ice crystals expanding and rupturing its delicate walls, killing it instantly. But the Iceland moss, in its dry winter state, contains very little free water to freeze. It is already prepared. And the fungus produces its own incredible biochemicals, cryoprotectants that act like a natural antifreeze, protecting the vital cellular machinery of both partners from the little ice that does form. It can survive being frozen solid at temperatures of -40 degrees or colder, and then when the spring thaw comes and the snow melts, it will rehydrate and begin photosynthesizing as if nothing happened. In the summer, the challenge is the opposite. The sun, even at its low northern angle, can be relentless, beating down on the dark volcanic rock and raising surface temperatures to scorching levels. Again, the lichen strategy is simple. It dries out. It enters its dormant state, its tough upper cortex, acting as a sunshade for the precious algae below, reflecting the harshest rays. It simply waits out the heat, waits for the cool of the evening, for the dew, for the next passing shower. It does not fight the environment. It yields to it, and in yielding, it endures. And this patient endurance is written into its very pace of life. A lichen is a monument to slowness. It grows at a rate that is almost geological. A healthy, mature thallus of Cetraria islandica might grow only a few millimeters in an entire year. A dense carpet of it, covering a patch of ground, may be decades or even centuries old. To us, with our fleeting lifespans, this pace is almost incomprehensible. We are used to plants that sprout, grow, and die in a single season. The lichen operates on a different clock. It measures time in seasons and decades. Its growth a slow, silent response to the accumulation of rainy days and hours of sunlight. It is a living testament to the idea that persistence, not speed, is what allows life to triumph in the harshest of places. So how does a creature that grows this slowly reproduce? How does it spread across the vast, empty lava fields? It has several ingenious methods, each one perfectly suited to its slow and steady lifestyle. The simplest is fragmentation. A piece of the dry, brittle thallus is broken off, perhaps by the hoof of a grazing reindeer or by a strong gust of wind, and is carried to a new location. When conditions are right, when there is enough moisture, this tiny fragment, which already contains both the fungal and algal partners, can begin to grow into a new complete lichen. It is a perfect clone of its parent, a tiny piece of the kingdom setting off to found a new colony. But lichens have also evolved more specialized structures for this kind of asexual reproduction. If you look very closely at the surface of some lichens, you might see what looks like a fine powdery dust. These are called soradia. Each grain of this dust is a microscopic package, a few algal cells wrapped in a protective web of fungal hyphae. They are like tiny, self-contained lifeboats, designed to be carried on the wind. When one of these packages lands on a suitable surface, it has everything it needs to start a new lichen, the architect and the gardener, already packed together. Cetraria islandica can also produce these, as well as slightly larger, more complex structures called isidia, which are like miniature, finger-like outgrowths of the main body that can break off. This method of reproduction is efficient and reliable. It ensures that the successful partnership is passed on intact to the next generation. However, the fungal partner has not forgotten its own, more ancient lineage. It still retains the ability to reproduce sexually on its own. On some lichens, you may have noticed small cup-like or disc-like structures. These are called apothecia. This is the fungus's own reproductive organ. Inside these cups, the fungus produces spores through a sexual process. These spores are incredibly tiny and lightweight, and when released, they can travel for immense distances on the wind, like microscopic dust. But this method comes with a tremendous risk. A fungal spore is only half the story. It is just the architect. When it lands, it is alone. To become a lichen, this tiny germinating spore must, by sheer chance, find and capture a compatible free-living alga from the environment. Imagine the odds. A single spore, landing on a bare rock, must wait for the right species of microscopic green alga to happen to be washed or blown past it. It's like building a house and hoping that the perfect skilled gardener will just happen to wander by and decide to move in. It is an incredible gamble. Most of these spores will fail. They will germinate and die, having never found their partner, but it only takes one success out of millions to establish a new genetic combination in a new place. This sexual reproduction is the fungus's way of ensuring genetic diversity, of shuffling the deck, and allowing for the possibility of adaptation over long evolutionary timescales. It is a game of chance played out on a microscopic scale, a story of incredible odds and rare triumphant successes. But the Iceland moss is not just a passive resident of this landscape, it is an active participant. It is a chemical engineer of the highest order. The lichen produces a whole suite of unique, complex organic compounds known as lichen acids. These are not found anywhere else in the biological world, and they serve multiple vital purposes. First, they are a powerful defense. If you were to taste a piece of Cetraria islandica, you would find it intensely bitter. This bitterness comes from its specific lichen acids, primarily one called fumaroprotocetraric acid. This chemical profile makes the lichen unpalatable to most generalist herbivores. A slug or an insect that takes a bite will quickly decide to look for a more pleasant meal. This chemical shield is crucial for an organism that grows so slowly. It cannot afford to be eaten. It cannot regrow tissue quickly, so it invests its energy in making itself as unpleasant to eat as possible. Second, these acids are powerful antimicrobial agents. They prevent bacteria and other fungi from growing on the surface of the lichen. A lichen thallus is a very stable, long-lived surface, and in the damp, cool climate of Iceland, it would otherwise be a prime target for colonization by molds, mildews, and bacterial films. But its own chemical arsenal keeps its surface clean, creating a kind of sterile field around itself. It is its own antiseptic, its own preservative. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, these acids are what allow the lichen to perform its most sacred and fundamental ecological role. They are chelating agents. This is a chemical term, but what it means is simple and profound. These acids can break down rock. When rainwater washes over the thallus, it becomes weakly acidic with these dissolved compounds. This water seeps into the microscopic cracks and fissures in the volcanic stone, and over immense periods of time, the acids begin to work. They latch onto mineral ions, iron, magnesium, calcium, and pull them out of the crystal structure of the rock itself. It is a slow, patient, and relentless form of biological weathering. The lichen is, in the most literal sense, eating the stone. It's not digestion in the way an animal digests food, but it serves the same purpose. It liberates essential minerals that the lichen needs for its own metabolism, nutrients that are otherwise locked away in the solid rock. But in doing so, it accomplishes something far greater. The process of pulling out these minerals physically degrades the surface of the rock, turning solid stone into tiny grains of sand and dust. Now picture this process happening over a century. A carpet of Iceland moss is established on a bare lava flow. Every time it rains, a weak acid washes over the rock. Every tiny rhizine that grips the stone provides a point of entry for this slow chemical assault. Over the decades, the rock surface beneath the lichen becomes pitted and softened, and all the while the lichen is living and dying. Tiny fragments break off, older parts of the thallus decay. This organic matter, the remnants of the fungal hyphae and the algal cells, falls into the tiny spaces the lichen has etched into the rock. It mixes with the mineral dust created by the acid, and right there, in that microscopic layer between the living lichen and the dying stone, something miraculous is happening. Soil is being born. This is the lichen's greatest gift to the world. It is the pioneer, the first comer, on a landscape sterilized by volcanic fire, where there is nothing but bare, sterile rock. The lichen is the first organism that can arrive and not just survive, but begin to create a habitat for everything that will follow. This thin, organic-rich dust it creates is a foothold. It's a place where a speck of dust carrying a moss spore, a real moss spore, this time can land and find just enough purchase, just enough moisture, and just enough nutrient to germinate. And once the true mosses arrive, their rhizoids can penetrate this proto-soil, binding it together, trapping more wind-blown dust, and deepening the layer of life. The Iceland moss is the first domino to fall in the long, slow process of ecological succession. It is the foundational layer upon which entire ecosystems are built. After the mosses come the grasses, their roots reaching deeper. After the grasses, perhaps some hardy wildflowers, and then, over centuries or millennia, the dwarf willows and birches that characterize the subarctic woodlands. But it all starts here, with the quiet, patient chemistry of a dual organism, dissolving stone and turning it into the stuff of life. So when we look at a field of Iceland moss, we are not just looking at a carpet of curious organisms, we are looking at a soil factory, working on a geological timescale. We are witnessing the very first chapter in the story of the land's recovery and rebirth. And the kingdom it creates is not just for the future, it is a thriving world in the here and now. Let's shrink down again and enter the miniature forest of a single clump of Cetraria islandica. The branching scroll-like thallus creates an incredibly complex three-dimensional space. It is a labyrinth of tunnels, caves and sheltered valleys. And this world is teeming with microscopic life that depends on the lichen for its very existence. This is the preferred habitat of one of Earth's most famously indestructible creatures, the tardigrade, the water bear. These microscopic, eight-legged invertebrates are masters of survival, capable of entering a state of suspended animation even more profound than the lichens. They can survive being boiled, frozen to near absolute zero, crushed by immense pressures, and even exposed to the hard vacuum and radiation of outer space. But to live their active lives, they need a film of water, and the lichen mat is the perfect place to find it. They crawl through the damp spaces between the lichen branches, feeding on the algal cells or the fungal hyphae, and on the bacteria that live there. When the lichen dries out, the tardigrade also dries out, curling into a tiny, indestructible ball called a tun. They wait, alongside their lichen home, for the next rain. The lichen is their universe. It provides their food, their water, their shelter, and the very trigger for their cycle of life and suspended animation. Living alongside the tardigrades are countless other microscopic beings. Tiny mites, like microscopic suits of armor, clamber over the leathery surfaces. Springtails, primitive insect-like creatures, use their unique appendages to launch themselves from one branch to another. Nematode worms, impossibly small, swim in the films of water that cling to the lichen's body. For these creatures, a single patch of Iceland moss is a vast and complex ecosystem. It is a city, with high-rises, sheltered alleyways, public squares, and abundant food. The lichen is the architect not only of its own body, but of a thriving metropolis for the microscopic, and its role extends upwards into the world we can see. While its bitter acids deter most grazers, there are a few specialists that have evolved the ability to overcome this defense. The most famous, of course, are reindeer and caribou. These magnificent northern animals possess special bacteria in their stomachs and produce enzymes capable of breaking down the complex carbohydrates in the lichen, particularly a substance called lichinin, which is indigestible to most other animals. For these herds, in the depths of winter when all other vegetation is buried under deep snow, the lichens are a lifeline. They will use their hooves to scrape away the snow and feed on the exposed carpets of lichen, including Cetraria islandica. It is a crucial, energy-rich food source that allows them to survive the long, lean months. In this way, the slow, patient energy captured from sunlight by a microscopic alga, housed in a fungal fortress, is transferred up the food chain, becoming the fuel that powers the great migrations of the northern herds. Humans, too, have long understood its value. For the early Norse settlers of Iceland and for people across the subarctic, Iceland moss was both food and medicine. They discovered that boiling the lichen for a long time would break down the bitter acids and release the nutritious starchy compounds within. It could be made into a porridge, used to thicken soups, or ground into a flour to supplement the rye. It was a famine food, certainly, but a reliable one, a gift from a barren land. Its antimicrobial properties were also recognized. It was used in poultices for wounds and brewed into teas and tonics for coughs and colds. Its soothing, gelatinous texture coating the throat, a practice that science now understands is due to its demulcent properties. But for us, here tonight, its value lies not in its utility, but in its being. To truly appreciate it, we must lie still and simply observe this quiet dual life. We see the fungus, the patient builder, a master of structure and defense, creating a safe haven in a dangerous world. And we see the alga, the diligent gardener, performing the daily miracle of turning light into life. We see their pact, a relationship born of necessity that has become one of the most successful strategies on the planet. We see a being that breathes water, that holds its breath for months, that wears the stone away with a gentle, acidic touch. We see a creator of worlds, both on the grand scale of soil formation and on the microscopic scale of the tardigrade's forest home. It is a living bridge between the geological and the biological, between the inert world of rock and the vibrant world of the ecosystem that will one day stand upon it. It is a reminder that life does not always shout. Sometimes its greatest triumphs are achieved in silence, in slowness, and in a partnership so intimate that it blurs the very line between one individual and another. Here, in this miniature kingdom, the grand drama of survival, creation and endurance plays out not in days or weeks, but over the quiet passing of the seasons and the slow, deep time of the earth itself. It is a slow and humble life, but it is the foundation for everything else we see across this vast and beautiful landscape. It is the patient gardener, tending the stone, waiting for the forest that is to come. Chapter 3. The Sustainer. Iceland Moss in the Saga of the Icelandic people. Nurship so intimate that it blurs the very line between one individual and another. Here, in this miniature kingdom, the grand drama of survival, creation and endurance plays out not in days or weeks, but over the quiet passing of the seasons and the slow, deep time of the earth itself. It is a slow and humble life, but it is the foundation for everything else we see across this vast and beautiful landscape. It is the patient gardener, tending the stone, waiting for the forest that is to come. And then, one day, a new kind of animal arrived. An animal that walked on two legs, that carried fire and iron, that sailed in long ships from across a vast and unforgiving sea. Around the end of the 9th century, the first permanent human settlers arrived in Iceland, the Norsemen. They were a people of sagas, of ambition, and of immense courage. But the land they found was unlike anything they had known. It was an island of sublime and terrible beauty, a place still in the throes of its own creation. It was a landscape of raw elemental power, vast glaciers that groaned and carved into icy lagoons, volcanoes that slept under white sheets of snow, and endless rolling fields of black hardened lava. There were no gentle ancient forests of oak or pine like in their Scandinavian homelands. There were only stunted birchwoods, thin and scattered, clinging to sheltered valleys. There were no vast fertile plains for agriculture. The soil was thin, volcanic and grudging. The growing season was a frantic, fleeting window between winters that were long, dark and profoundly cold. Imagine standing on that shore for the first time. The air is so clean it feels sharp in your lungs. The wind is a constant presence, a physical force that scours the land and carries the scent of salt and cold stone. In this new world, everything that meant survival, grain, timber, livestock pasture was scarce. The settlers brought their sheep, their cattle, and their horses, and for a time they survived. But this island demanded a different kind of knowledge. It demanded humility. It demanded an intimacy with the land that went beyond farming and animal husbandry. It required learning the secrets of what was already there, what had been waiting patiently for millennia. And what was there, in almost boundless abundance, was the patient gardener, the Iceland moss, Cetraria islandica. It carpeted the lava fields, it softened the harsh slopes of the fells, it grew in a thick, crisp mat across the highlands. To the eyes of a farmer from Norway, It must have looked like nothing more than strange, dry, curly vegetation. Not grass, not moss, not a true plant. A curiosity. But survival is the most powerful catalyst for curiosity. In the face of a failing crop, a harsh winter, or the gnawing ache of hunger, curiosity becomes a desperate, brilliant tool. Sooner or later, someone must have knelt down, picked up a brittle olive-brown thallus, and wondered, could this be food? This single question would forge a bond between a people and a lichen that would last for over 1,000 years. It would become a cornerstone of Icelandic identity, a story of endurance written not in ink on vellum but in recipes, in remedies, and in the collective memory of a nation. The Iceland moss, this quiet, unassuming life form, was about to enter the human saga. It was about to become the sustainer, the lifeline, the silent partner in the very survival of the Icelandic people. It wasn't just a part of the landscape, it was about to become a part of them, woven into their bodies and their culture, a real-world symbol that to endure, one must learn to draw strength from the very stones themselves. The relationship between the Icelanders and their new island home was often a brutal one. The history of this nation is punctuated by periods of unimaginable hardship, a recurring cycle of scarcity and famine known grimly as the Hunger Vofana, the hunger spectre. When a volcanic eruption like that of Lichen in the 1780s could blot out the sun with ash, poisoning the grass and killing the livestock, the very fabric of society was pushed to the brink. When the sea ice, in what was known as the ice years, would drift down from the north and blockade the coast for months on end, cutting off trade and plunging the climate into an even deeper chill, the pantry would grow bare with terrifying speed. In these moments, the line between life and death was drawn by what you could find, what you could stomach, and what you knew how to prepare. In this relentless battle for survival, the Iceland moss was not a delicacy. It was not a choice. It was a necessity. It was the food of last resort, the bulwark against starvation. But unlocking the nutrition held within this lichen was not a simple matter of gathering and eating. Nature, in its infinite and frugal wisdom, equips its creations with defenses. The Iceland moss, like many lichens, produces a suite of complex chemicals called lichen acids. In this case, primarily cetraric acid and fumaroprotocetraric acid. These compounds are a brilliant evolutionary strategy. They are intensely bitter, deterring most animals from grazing on them. They are also, for the human digestive system, quite harsh. Eaten raw or improperly prepared, Iceland moss can cause severe stomach cramps and digestive distress. The early Icelanders had to learn, through what we can only imagine was a painful process of trial and error, that this plant held its sustenance behind a locked door, and they had to find the key. The key, they discovered, was a patient and thorough process of transformation, a kind of domestic alchemy that turned a bitter, almost inedible substance into a source of life. It began with the harvest. This was often a communal activity, a journey into the highlands, the Heidi, during the late summer when the lichen was dry and plentiful. Picture it, a small group of people, walking for hours or even days away from the relative shelter of their coastal farmsteads. They move into a landscape that feels otherworldly. The ground underfoot is a chaotic sea of old lava, jagged and black, but softened by a thick, springy carpet of mosses and lichens. The silence is immense, broken only by the wind and the cry of a distant bird. Here they would gather the fialagros, the mountain grass. They would use their hands, or perhaps a small rake, carefully lifting the crisp, dry thalli from the ground, shaking free the dirt and pine needles, and placing them into woven baskets or cloth sacks. It was slow, methodical work, a harvest not from a cultivated field, but from the wild pantry of the earth itself. Once brought back to the farm, the real work began. The first and most crucial step was leaching. The Icelanders had to wash away the bitterness, to coax the defensive acids out of the lichen's very structure. There were two primary methods, each a testament to their ingenuity and patience. The simplest was to use cold, running water. The gathered lichen would be placed in a cloth bag and submerged in a clear cold stream for several days, the constant flow of water slowly, painstakingly, carrying the soluble acids away. You can almost feel the deep, penetrating chill of that glacial water, see the bag swaying gently in the current, a slow purification powered by the land itself. But a far more effective method involved chemistry, a piece of folk science passed down through generations. This was the use of an alkaline solution. The Icelanders would use wood ash, a common byproduct of their hearth fires. They would mix the ash with water to create a simple lye, a solution rich in potassium carbonate. The Iceland moss was then boiled or steeped in this ash water. The alkali worked a kind of magic. It reacted with the bitter lichen acids, neutralizing them and rendering them soluble, making them far easier to wash away. You can imagine the scene inside a turf house on a grey afternoon, a large pot simmering over the fire, the air filled with a strange, earthy, slightly acrid smell. The lichen, as it cooked, would soften and swell, its colour deepening. After this alkaline bath, it would be rinsed, again and again, in fresh water until the bitterness was gone, or at least muted to a tolerable, faintly mineralic tang. The water itself would tell the story. The first rinses would be brown and bitter, the last would run clear. Only then was the Iceland moss ready. It was laid out to dry, perhaps on clean cloths spread on the low roof of the turf house, or on racks near the warmth of the fire. When thoroughly dry, it became brittle and crisp once more, and now it could be transformed. Often it was taken to the quern, a small hand-operated stone quern. The sound of that stone grinding against stone is one of the ancient, essential sounds of human survival. With each turn of the handle, the dry lichen was pulverized, crushed into a coarse meal or a fine, dark, greyish-brown flour. This was the final product. This was the treasure won from the highlands. It didn't look like much. It had a faint, earthy smell, like dry soil and mushrooms. But this humble powder was concentrated energy, a source of carbohydrates, vitamins and minerals that could mean the difference between seeing the spring and succumbing to the long winter. With this flour, the Icelandic people created a whole category of survival foods. Perhaps the most fundamental was fælagrasabrauð, or mountain grass bread. In a land where cereal grains like rye and barley were precious and often in short supply, Iceland moss flour was a vital extender. An Icelandic baker, usually the woman of the house, wouldn't be working with pure wheat flour. She would take what little rye flour she had and stretch it, sometimes mixing it half and half, or even more, with the dark lichen flour. The resulting dough would be heavy and dense, with a deep, earthy colour. It wouldn't rise like a modern loaf. It would be a flat bread, cooked on a hot griddle or baked on the embers of the fire. The taste was something unique to this landscape. It was not the soft, sweet taste of a wheat loaf. It had a substantial, slightly chewy texture and a complex, savoury flavour, with that lingering, slightly bitter undertone, a constant reminder of its origin on the cold, windswept fells. It was sustenance, pure and simple. Every dense, nourishing bite was a victory against scarcity. Even more common, an everyday staple, was fælagrasagrautur, a porridge made from the prepared lichen. Small pieces of the leached and dried lichen, or the coarse meal, would be simmered slowly in water, or if you were lucky, in milk or whey. Here, another of the lichen's secret properties was revealed. Iceland moss is rich in polysaccharides, complex carbohydrates named lichinin and isoleucinin. When heated in liquid, these compounds transform. They absorb water and create a thick, gelatinous, mucilaginous texture. The porridge would become thick and soothing, almost like a modern oatmeal or a cornstarch pudding. For a people whose diet was often rough and monotonous, consisting of dried fish and salted meat, this warm, smooth porridge was a comfort. It was easy to digest, filling, and deeply warming. It was often the first meal of the morning, preparing the body for a day of hard labour in the cold, and the last meal of the night, a small shield against the chill of the turf house. In leaner times, the porridge might be thinned into a soup, a fiala grassa soupa. This might be little more than the lichen simmered in water, or a thin mutton broth, perhaps with a few wild herbs for flavor if they could be found. It wasn't a feast, but it was hot, it was nourishing, and it kept the hunger spectre at bay for another day. The Iceland moss was also a valuable addition to other foods. It was often used as a filler in blóðmör, a type of blood sausage, and lífrapilsa, a liver sausage, similar to Scottish haggis, mixed with suet, rye and either sheep's blood or liver. The lichen added bulk and nutrients, making the precious animal products go further. It was a perfect example of the Icelandic principle of using everything, of wasting nothing. Every part of the animal, and every gift from the land, however humble, was incorporated into the cycle of survival. For centuries, these were the flavors of endurance. This was the diet that fueled a nation through its darkest hours. This relationship with the Iceland moss was not about culinary delight. It was a pact. The people offered their labor, their patience, and their ingenuity to unlock the lichen's secrets. In return, the lichen offered them its very substance, its stored sunlight and minerals, its quiet, steadfast energy. It became more than just a plant. It was a participant in their history, a character in their long and arduous saga. Every bowl of porridge, every slice of dark bread, was a testament to a hard-won knowledge and a profound, necessary connection to the starkly beautiful land they had chosen as their home. But the role of Iceland moss in the lives of the Norse settlers and their descendants went far beyond the hearth and the cooking pot. In a world without modern pharmaceuticals, the natural landscape was also the community's apothecary. Every plant was assessed, not just for its caloric value, but for its potential to heal. And in this vast, natural pharmacy, Cetraria islandica was one of the most trusted and versatile remedies. Its use in folk medicine is a story as old as its use for food, a parallel thread of knowledge passed down through generations, a testament to the keen observational skills of people living in deep intimacy with their environment. Perhaps its earliest medicinal use was guided by a philosophy that echoes across many ancient cultures, the doctrine of signatures. This was the belief that a plant's appearance gave clues to its medicinal purpose, a kind of visual language written by the creator or by nature itself into the fabric of living things. When you look closely at a thallus of Iceland moss, its lobes are flattened, branched and curled. To an observant eye, they bear a striking resemblance to the branching structures of the bronchi and the lobes of the human lung. This resemblance was not lost on the early Icelanders or on other European cultures who also used the lichen and sometimes referred to it as lungwort. It was a clear sign, a whisper from the land itself, that this plant held power over ailments of the chest and throat. And in this, the doctrine was remarkably, almost miraculously, correct. The most widespread and enduring medicinal use of Iceland moss was as a remedy for respiratory illnesses. Coughs, colds, bronchitis and congestion were common afflictions in the damp, cold and often smoky environment of a traditional Icelandic turf house. The standard remedy was a warm, soothing brew, a medicinal tea or decoction of fialagros. The prepared, cleaned lichen would be simmered gently in water or milk. As it cooked, those same polysaccharides we encountered in the porridge licinin and isolicinin would dissolve into the liquid, creating a thick, syrupy, mucilaginous tea. When a person drank this warm liquid, it performed a simple but profound act of healing. It would coat the raw, inflamed mucous membranes of the throat and chest. This physical, soothing layer, what modern medicine calls a demulcent, would calm the irritation that triggers a cough. It would protect the delicate tissues, giving them a chance to heal. Imagine the relief. For someone suffering from a harsh, rasping cough that kept them awake at night, a warm cup of this lichen tea would have felt like a miracle. It was a gentle internal balm, quieting the cough, easing the breath, and providing a sense of deep, penetrating comfort. The act of its preparation itself was part of the cure. The slow simmering, the earthy, wholesome aroma filling the small home, the promise of relief. This was not mere folklore. It was effective folk science. We now know that these polysaccharides have proven demulcent and anti-inflammatory properties. The lichen also contains those bitter lichen acids which, in smaller medicinal doses, act as expectorants, helping to loosen and clear phlegm from the lungs. It was a multi-pronged approach to healing, all contained within a single humble organism. This remedy was so effective that its fame spread far beyond the shores of Iceland. From the 17th century onwards, Iceland moss was listed as an official medicine in European pharmacopoeias. It was prescribed by learned physicians across the continent for all manner of chest complaints, most notably for treating the persistent, debilitating cough associated with tuberculosis, or consumption as it was then known. For patients wasted by this terrible disease, an Iceland moss jelly or broth was a perfect prescription. It soothed their cough while also providing easily digestible, concentrated nutrition to help rebuild their strength. The same properties that made it a balm for the chest also made it a powerful remedy for the digestive system. The Icelandic diet, heavy in preserved meats and dried fish, and often lacking in fresh vegetables, could be harsh on the gut. Ailments like gastritis, indigestion, and stomach ulcers were likely common. Once again, a tea or a thin gruel of Iceland moss came to the rescue. The soothing gel-like coating it created was just as effective on an irritated stomach lining as it was on a raw throat. It was a gentle shield, calming inflammation and providing relief from pain. Furthermore, the bitter principles of the lichen acids, while needing to be leached out for food, were valued in medicinal preparations. In small doses, these bitters act as a tonic. They gently stimulate the production of saliva and digestive juices, including bile. For someone with a weak appetite or sluggish digestion, perhaps recovering from an illness, a small amount of Iceland moss tea before a meal could help to awaken the entire digestive system, improving their ability to absorb nutrients and regain their strength. It worked at both ends of the problem, stimulating a healthy digestive process while simultaneously protecting the tissues from irritation. The lichen's healing powers were not just for internal use. The wild landscape was a place of constant minor injuries, cuts from sharp lava rock, scrapes from farm work, burns from the hearth fire. Infection was a constant danger. Here, another of the lichen's hidden chemical secrets became a vital tool. Many lichens, including Cetraria islandica, produce a compound called usnic acid. This remarkable substance is a potent natural antibiotic and antiviral agent. It is a product of the lichen's own ancient war against invading microbes. The Icelanders, through observation, learned to harness this power. The dry lichen could be crushed into a fine powder and dusted directly onto a wound or a skin infection. Or it could be used to make a poultice, perhaps chewed or mixed with a little water and applied directly to the skin. The usnic acid would inhibit the growth of bacteria, preventing infection and promoting faster healing. It was a natural, freely available first aid kit, a sterile and antiseptic dressing that grew on the hillsides all around them. For over a millennium, the Iceland moss was the quiet doctor of the Icelandic people. It was the remedy they turned to for the coughs of their children, the stomach pains of their elders, and the wounds of their daily labor. This knowledge was not written in textbooks. It was a living tradition, passed from mother to daughter, from father to son. It was a deep empirical understanding of the land's gifts, born from necessity and refined over centuries. It demonstrates a profound truth, that for most of human history, the line between food and medicine was beautifully fluidly blurred. The things that sustained the body were also the things that healed it. And in the stark, demanding landscape of Iceland, this humble lichen was the ultimate embodiment of that principle, a source of both nourishment and restoration, the quiet guardian of the people's health. For most of its history in the human saga, the value of Iceland moss was measured in the most fundamental units of all: mouthfuls of food, days of survival, coughs soothed in the deep of winter. It was a common good, a resource of the Afretur, the common lands of the Highlands, free for any family to gather for their own use. Its economy was the economy of the household, its trade conducted through the currency of communal well-being. But as the centuries passed, and Iceland became more deeply connected to the wider world, this humble lichen would be drawn into a new kind of economy, one of ships and trade and cash. The secret of the Icelandic Highlands was about to become an international commodity. The shift began in earnest in the 17th and 18th centuries. Word of the lichen's remarkable medicinal properties, particularly its effectiveness against respiratory ailments, had spread throughout Europe. Doctors in Copenhagen, London, and Berlin read reports of its use and began prescribing it to their own patients. As demand grew, apothecaries and merchants began to look to the source. Iceland, the land that gave the lichen its very name, was the obvious and most abundant supplier. Under the Danish trade monopoly that controlled Iceland's economy for centuries, Danish merchants began to actively encourage the collection and export of fialagros. Suddenly, a plant that had only ever been a tool for local survival was transformed into a cash crop, or more accurately, a cash gathering. For the Icelandic farmers, many of whom lived in a largely cashless society, this presented a new and vital opportunity. Gathering Iceland moss for export provided a way to earn a small amount of money or acquire trade goods that were otherwise unobtainable, things like coffee, sugar, better tools, or finer cloth. It was a chance to step ever so slightly outside the closed loop of subsistence farming. This new trade profoundly changed the nature of the harvest. It was no longer a matter of a family gathering a few sacks for their own winter pantry. Now it was a large-scale commercial enterprise. The work was arduous, and it often fell to those with the most time and the least power: women, children, and farmhands. In the late summer, entire groups would decamp to the highlands, setting up temporary camps and spending weeks at a time on the vast, lonely lava fields and heaths. Let us try to imagine the scene. It is August. The brief Icelandic summer is waning, and there is a crispness in the air that hints at the coming autumn. A group of women and children are scattered across a rolling expanse of grey-green land. The sky above is vast, and often heavy with cloud. Each person carries a large sack and a rake. The work is back-breaking. They bend and scrape, hour after hour, the teeth of the rake pulling the dry, brittle lichen free from the volcanic soil. The sound is a constant, dry rustle, punctuated by the sigh of the wind. Their hands become chapped and raw from the cold and the constant handling of the abrasive lichen. At the end of the day, they would have gathered enormous piles of the stuff, which then had to be cleaned of dirt, stones, and other vegetation as best they could. These great quantities of harvested lichen were then transported, often on the backs of hardy Icelandic horses, down from the highlands to the coastal trading posts. There, at the merchant station, the lichen would be weighed and inspected. The farmer would be paid not for the quality of his grain or the fatness of his sheep, but for the weight of the wild grass he had scraped from the mountains. From these small scattered ports, the Iceland moss was packed into the holds of sailing ships. It crossed the stormy North Atlantic, a strange and precious cargo, destined for the pharmacies of Europe. There, it would be sold in neat paper packages at a price many times what the Icelandic farmer had received, prescribed to wealthy city dwellers suffering from ailments of the lungs. This trade reached its peak in the 19th century. Records show that tens of thousands of kilograms were being exported annually. It became a small but significant part of the Icelandic economy, a direct link between the most remote, windswept corners of the Icelandic interior and the sophisticated urban centers of continental Europe. It's a remarkable thought. A substance that was, at that very moment, being simmered into a survival porridge in a tiny turf house in the north of Iceland was also being prepared as an expensive medicinal jelly for a patient in a grand house in Paris. The lichen was living a double life, a symbol of both poverty and prized medicine. For the Icelandic people, this economic aspect added another layer to their relationship with the lichen. It was still the ultimate safety net against famine, and the first remedy reached for in times of sickness. But now, it was also a tangible asset. A good harvest of fialagros could mean the difference between a winter of bare subsistence and one with a few small comforts. It could mean a new pair of shoes for a child, or a steel needle for the matriarch of the family. It was a fragile but real connection to a world of commerce, powered by the simple, ancient act of gathering what the land provided. Eventually the trade began to decline. The dawn of the 20th century brought with it the rise of modern medicine. New synthetic drugs and antibiotics were developed that were more potent and reliable than traditional herbal remedies. The demand for Iceland moss in European pharmacies dwindled. The ships stopped coming for it, and so the lichen retreated from the world of international commerce and returned to its older, more intimate role within Icelandic culture. The era of the lichen as an export commodity was over, but its story was not. It had left an indelible mark, demonstrating that even the humblest of nature's creations could, for a time, find a place on the world stage, and that the wealth of a nation can sometimes be measured not in gold, but in the resilience of its people and the quiet abundance of its land. To truly understand the bond between the Icelandic people and the Iceland moss, we must look beyond its practical uses as food, medicine, or a trade good. We must look to the place it holds in the cultural imagination, in the soul of the nation. For 1,000 years, this lichen has been more than a resource. It has been a silent teacher, a constant companion, and a powerful symbol. Its story is interwoven with the very identity of the Icelandic people, reflecting their own saga of endurance in one of the world's most challenging environments. The lichen is first and foremost a living metaphor for resilience. It thrives where almost nothing else can. It colonizes raw, barren lava fields, the fresh wounds of the earth. It clings to stone in the face of howling, subarctic winds. It endures months of darkness and crushing cold under a blanket of snow, only to reawaken with the return of the faint sun. It is patient, it is tenacious, it is deceptively strong. In this, the Icelandic people saw a mirror of themselves. They too had colonized a harsh and unforgiving land. They too had learned to survive long, dark winters and the constant threat of nature's violent power. They had clung to this rock in the middle of the ocean, building a society and a unique culture against all odds. The national character of Iceland is often summed up in the phrase "Þetta reddast," which loosely translates to "it will all work out okay." It is not a phrase of blind optimism, but of a deep historical confidence in their own ability to endure, to make do, to find a way. The Iceland moss is the botanical embodiment of Þetta reddast. It is a quiet, constant reminder that life can persist and even flourish in the most unlikely of places. While it may not feature as a magical plant in the great Icelandic sagas in the way that, say, the rowan tree does in other Norse mythologies, its presence is felt in the very backdrop of those stories. The sagas are tales of survival, of feuds and famines, of human drama played out against a vast and indifferent landscape. When a character in a saga is outlawed, cast out to fend for himself in the Highlands, the Iceland moss is the ground beneath his feet. It is the food that stands between him and starvation. It is the silent, edible landscape of his exile. It is part of the very fabric of the world in which these epic human stories unfold, the humble foundation upon which grander tales are built. Furthermore, the act of gathering the moss was an entry into a part of the landscape steeped in folklore and mystique. The Icelandic Highlands, the wild interior of the country, were traditionally seen as the domain of otherworldly beings. This was the home of the Huldafolk, the hidden people or elves, who were believed to live within strangely shaped rocks and hills. To venture into the highlands to harvest the Philological was to enter their world. It was a place where one had to be respectful, to move quietly, and to be mindful of the unseen residents. Stories and folk beliefs would have surrounded this activity, cautioning gatherers not to disturb certain rocks or to leave a small offering for the hidden folk, ensuring a safe return and a bountiful harvest. The lichen, in this sense, was a bridge between the world of the human farmstead and the wild, magical world of the Icelandic interior. Today, the story of the Iceland moss has come full circle. No longer a food of desperation, It has been reborn in the modern Icelandic consciousness as a symbol of heritage and health. The threat of famine is a distant memory, and so the lichen can be appreciated in a new light. It has become a gourmet ingredient, a connection to the unique terroir of Iceland. You can now find it in high-end restaurants in Reykjavik, perhaps as a savory dust on a piece of lamb, in a complex broth, or as an ingredient in artisanal bread that harks back to the Fæla Grasabrauð of old, but is now eaten for its unique flavor and history, not for survival. It has found a new life in traditional beverages as well. The most famous is Fælagrasnaps, a type of Icelandic schnapps where the lichen is infused in alcohol. The resulting spirit is dark and aromatic, with a complex, bittersweet, earthy flavor that is said to be the very taste of the Icelandic Highlands. To drink it is to taste the wind, the volcanic soil, and the clean, cold air. It is a toast to the resilience of the past. You will also find Iceland moss in modern herbal teas, sold in health food stores for its soothing properties, and in throat lozenges that are a direct commercial descendant of the old folk remedy for coughs. It has completed the journey from a sign of poverty to a badge of pride. It represents a conscious turning back towards the old ways, an appreciation for the wild and pure ingredients that the Icelandic landscape provides. And so we can finally connect it back, gently, to the idea that brought us here, to Tolkien's Middle-earth, and the magical Cordial of Miruvor, which gave the Fellowship warmth and renewed vigor on their perilous journey through the snows of Caradhras. What is the Iceland moss, if not the real world's Miruvor? For 1,000 years, it was the cordial of the Icelandic people on their own long, dark journey through the sagas of history. It did not have the instantaneous, supernatural magic of an elven draught. Its magic was slower, quieter, and deeper. It was the magic of a warm bowl of porridge on a freezing morning. It was the magic of a soothing tea that quieted a child's cough in the dead of night. It was the magic of a dense, dark bread that kept a family alive through a winter of famine. It was the magic of survival itself. This humble partnership between a fungus and an alga, living on a cold stone, gave a nation the strength to endure. That is a magic as profound and as real as any found in a book of fantasy. It is the quiet, enduring power of life itself, a power that asks only for our patience, our attention, and our respect. Chapter 4: An Inkling of the North. Tolkien's philological quest. To give that kind of patience, that kind of attention and respect, requires a very particular kind of mind. It is one thing to see the magic in a partnership between a fungus and an alga on a cold stone, to see the quiet, enduring power of life itself. It is another thing entirely to build a world so vast and so deep that it feels as if it has its own geology, its own ancient history, its own living magic. To do that, one must first be a student of the real world's deep past, a scholar of forgotten words and fractured myths. And so, before we can truly understand the creation of Miruvor, the elven cordial of warmth and strength, we must leave the windy plains of Iceland, just for a while, and travel into the quiet, lamp-lit study of the man who imagined it. We must try to understand the mind of John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. To call him a storyteller is of course true, but it is a profound understatement. It is like calling a master architect a builder of walls. Tolkien was, first and foremost, a philologist. It is a word we don't use very often anymore, but it is the key to everything he created. A linguist studies language, its structure and its rules. A philologist does something more. A philologist loves words. They love them not just for what they mean now, but for what they used to mean, for the stories they carry within them like insects trapped in amber. For the philologist, a single word can be a key that unlocks the door to an entire lost world. It is a kind of textual archaeology, carefully brushing away the dust of centuries to uncover the beliefs, the fears, and the hopes of people long gone. This was Tolkien's profession, but it was also his passion. He spent his days in the halls of Oxford, lecturing on the forgotten sounds and complex grammar of Old English and Middle English, and he spent his nights building a world, not from brick and mortar, but from the very sounds and structures he so deeply loved. His heart, and therefore the heart of Middle-earth, was rooted firmly in the cold, misty and heroic north of Europe. He was not drawn to the sun-drenched myths of Greece and Rome, with their beautiful, capricious and often petty gods. He felt a deeper kinship with a different kind of story, a different kind of courage. He found it in the Sagas of Iceland, the ancient poems of Scandinavia, and the epic songs of Finland. These were tales born of long dark winters, of a world where the forces of chaos, of giants and monsters, and the bitter biting cold were always pressing in at the edges of the firelight. Let us travel with him, in our minds, to the source. Let us open the books he opened. The first and most important is a collection of Norse poems, known as the Poetic Edda. This is not a single cohesive story, but a gathering of voices from the Viking Age, songs of gods and heroes, prophecies and wisdom. Within these pages we find the granite foundation of Middle-earth's cosmology. We hear of a world born from fire and ice, a world held together by a great tree, Yggdrasil, whose roots and branches connect all the realms. It is an idea that resonates so deeply in the two trees of Valinor, the source of all light, and later, the white tree of Gondor, the living symbol of a kingdom. But it is one particular poem in the Edda, the Völuspá, or the seeress's prophecy, that is perhaps the single most important mythological text for Tolkien's creation. In it, a seeress, a Völva, is summoned by the god Odin to recount all of history, from the very beginning of the world to its fiery, inevitable end at Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. And as she speaks, she lists the very first beings to populate the new world, the dwarves. She recites a long list of their names, a litany of strange guttural sounds, and if we listen closely, we hear something astonishingly familiar. We hear the names Thorin, Dwalin, Balin, Kili, Fili, Bifur, Bofur, Bombur, Nori, and Ori, and we hear another name, a dwarf with a staff, a master of magic, Gandalf. Tolkien did not invent these names. He borrowed them, respectfully and deliberately, from this ancient catalogue. He heard in them a sound, a texture that felt ancient and true, a sense of a people who belonged to the earth, who were born of stone. He was not merely stealing names, he was transplanting a seed from an ancient forest into his own soil, allowing it to grow into something new, yet still carrying the memory of its origin. Gandalf, in his world, would not be a dwarf, but the name itself, which translates from Old Norse as wand elf or magic elf, was too perfect to leave behind. It held the echo of a magical being, a wielder of power, a wanderer. This same poem, the Völuspá, gives us more than just names. It gives us a mood, a deep underlying philosophy that permeates all of Middle-earth. The Norse gods are not immortal in the way the Greek gods are. They know their doom is coming. They know that one day the forces of chaos will break free, that the great wolf Fenrir will devour Odin, that the world serpent will poison Thor, and that the world itself will be consumed by fire and sink into the sea. And yet, they do not despair. They live, they fight, they love, and they build, all in the full knowledge of their eventual defeat. This is the heart of what Tolkien called northern courage. It is the courage to fight a battle you know you cannot ultimately win, to defend the things you love against a darkness that is eternal, simply because it is the right thing to do. We see this courage everywhere in his work. We see it in Theoden King, riding out to face a hopeless battle at the Pelennor fields, crying death, 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 not in despair but in a final, glorious defiance. We see it in Aragorn and his small army, marching to the Black Gate of Mordor, not with any hope of victory but to offer themselves as a distraction, to buy a little more time for two small hobbits in the dark. It is the profound, beautiful and heartbreaking idea that victory is not the point. The point is how you face the long defeat. Beyond the mythology of the Eddas, Tolkien was equally enthralled by the Icelandic Sagas. These were different. They were not tales of gods, but sprawling prose histories of the very real families who settled Iceland. They are gritty, realistic, and deeply human stories of blood feuds, legal disputes, love, betrayal, and honor. They are filled with stoic, larger-than-life characters who speak in laconic, understated sentences even as they face death. From the Sagas, Tolkien learned how to write a history that felt real. Middle-earth is not just a stage for a story. It feels like a real place because it has a past, a deep, tangled and often tragic history, just like the world of the Sagas. The appendices of The Lord of the Rings, with their genealogies and timelines, are a direct echo of this saga tradition, giving the world a weight and a reality that fantasy had never had before. But Tolkien's scholarly quest did not end in the Norse world. There was another, entirely different current that flowed into his imagination, from a source that was, to him, even more beautiful and strange. He discovered the Finnish language, and it was, by his own admission, like discovering a wine cellar filled with a wine of a kind and flavor never tasted before. The sound of it, with its long vowels and complex case systems, utterly captivated him. It felt ancient, beautiful, and utterly alien to the Germanic languages he knew so well. And from this love for the language itself, he discovered Finland's national epic, the Kalevala. The Kalevala is a world away from the grim, heroic tone of the Norse myths. It is a world of shamanic magic, of heroes who are powerful singers and smiths, of quests to win brides and forge magical artifacts. Its central hero is not a warrior king like Odin, but an ancient, ageless bard named Wainamoinen, who sang the world into existence. The idea of creation as a form of music, of magic being channeled through song, struck a deep chord in Tolkien. It became the very basis of his own creation myth, the Ainulindale, where the world is brought into being by the great music of the Ainur. It is the reason the Elves are so deeply connected to song, and it is perhaps the reason for the existence of one of his most enigmatic characters, Tom Bombadil, the master of wood, water, and hill, whose power resides entirely in his nonsensical, joyful singing. He is a figure straight out of the Kalevala's world of nature-based musical magic. And the Kalevala gave him something else, something darker. It gave him the blueprint for one of his most tragic heroes. Within the Finnish epic is the story of a man named Kullervo, a figure cursed by fate. He is an orphan, abused and sold into slavery, who unknowingly seduces his own long-lost sister. When she discovers the truth, she throws herself into a river, and Kullervo, in his grief and despair, takes his own magic sword and asks it if it will consent to kill him. The sword agrees, and he falls upon its point. This dark, terrible story of inescapable doom and incestuous tragedy became the frame upon which Tolkien built the story of Turin Turambar, the hero of the children of Húrin. Like Kullervo, Turin is cursed from birth, an exile who brings ruin to all he loves. He too falls in love with and marries a woman who is, unknown to either of them, his own sister, Nienor. And when the truth is revealed by the dragon Glaurung, Nienor casts herself into a gorge, and Turin speaks to his own black sword, Gurthang, asking it to take his life. The sword in Tolkien's telling speaks back, and Turin falls upon it. It is one of the most direct and powerful borrowings in all of his work, a testament to how deeply the tragic grandeur of the Kalevala had sunk into his soul. He took this ancient Finnish tragedy and gave it a home in the deep history of his own elven world. And yet, for all this roaming in the far north of Scandinavia and Finland, Tolkien's philological heart always returned home, to the language of his own island. He was by trade a professor of Anglo-Saxon, or Old English. This was the language spoken in England before the Norman conquest, the language of the epic poem Beowulf. And Beowulf was perhaps the text he knew best in the world. He lived inside it. He understood its every nuance, its every word. The world of Beowulf is the world of the Rohirrim, the great hall of Meduseld, the golden hall of the kings of Rohan, is a direct reflection of Heorot, the great mead hall in Beowulf. The relationship between King Theoden and his riders, a bond of absolute loyalty known as the Comitatus, where warriors live and die for their lord, is the very core of Anglo-Saxon heroic culture. The language of Rohan, Their names, their love of horses, and their formal, somber way of speaking is all steeped in the world of pre-conquest England. Tolkien essentially brought a lost tribe of Anglo-Saxons, gave them horses, and set them down in the plains of Calenardon. And of course, Beowulf gave him his dragon. The dragon that Beowulf fights in his old age is not a simple monster. It is an ancient being, a draka, that has been sleeping on a hoard of treasure for centuries. It is woken not by malice, but by the theft of a single cup from its hoard by a runaway slave. Enraged, it emerges to burn the surrounding countryside. This is, in almost every detail, the story of Smaug in The Hobbit. A great, ancient, intelligent dragon, sleeping on a treasure hoard under a lonely mountain, awakened by the theft of a single cup by a small person, Bilbo Baggins. Tolkien took this ancient archetype, the guardian of treasure, and breathed into it a personality so vivid, so cunning and cruel, that Smaug has become the model for nearly every fantasy dragon that has followed. Even the very name of his world, Middle-earth, comes from his own native soil. It is a direct translation of the Old English word Midgard, which is itself a translation of the Old Norse Midgard. It means the middle enclosure, the world of mortals, poised between the heavens above and the underworlds below. For Tolkien, this was not just a clever name. It was a statement of intent. He was writing about our world, but in a forgotten, imaginary past. He felt that England, unlike Greece or Scandinavia, had lost its own mythology, severed from its roots by the Norman invasion in 1066. His entire life's work, in a way, was an attempt to write a mythology for England, to give it back the deep, resonant stories that he felt it lacked. And so we see the mind of the creator. It was not the mind of an inventor in the modern sense, someone who creates something entirely new from nothing. It was the mind of a master weaver, drawing threads from a dozen different ancient looms, the epic grandeur of the Norse gods, the gritty realism of the Icelandic Sagas, the musical magic of the Finnish bards, and the heroic melancholy of the Anglo-Saxon poets. He twisted these threads together, dyed them in the colours of his own Catholic faith and his experience in the trenches of the First World War, and wove them into a tapestry so vast and so intricate that it felt as though it had always existed. He built his world from the deep love of words. A name was never just a name. It had to have an etymology, a history, a reason for being, an entire language. Quenya was born from his love for the sound of Finnish. Another, Sindarin, was crafted to sound like Welsh. This obsessive, loving attention to detail, this philologist's passion, is what gives Middle-earth its feeling of truth. It is what separates it from so many other fantasies. It does not feel invented, it feels discovered, as if Tolkien had simply stumbled upon some ancient, forgotten archive and spent his life translating it for the rest of us. This is the mind that would in time conceive of a simple, healing cordial, a mind that understood that true magic, in a story as in life, is rarely about fireballs and lightning bolts. It is about endurance. It is about the courage to face the cold. It is about the quiet strength found in the small, humble things of the earth. He had read the ancient stories, he understood the deep history, and he knew that for a people living on the edge of a great darkness, a small cup of warmth, a reminder of summer in the dead of winter, could be the most powerful magic of all. He had found the epic in the Eddas and the Sagas, but to find his most subtle magic, he would look back once more to the cold, resilient landscapes of the north, and to a small, tenacious life form he knew well, a life form that held the secret of survival. Chapter 5, The Alchemical Draft, From Lichen to the Cordial of Imladris. And so we find ourselves standing at the edge of a great intellectual wilderness, holding a single, humble clue, a life form that held the secret of survival. This secret, whispered by the wind across frozen volcanic plains and etched into the pages of ancient sagas, was not a grand, sweeping pronouncement. It was a quiet, practical truth, embodied by one of the Earth's most patient and unassuming creations, the lichen. Specifically, that beautiful, frilled, olive-grey organism we have come to know as Iceland moss, Cetraria islandica. This is where our journey takes a turn, from the purely biological to the alchemical. Not the alchemy of turning lead into gold, but a far more profound and delicate transformation, the alchemy of turning scientific reality into enduring myth. The author we have been following, this meticulous scholar of language and landscape, was a master of this art. He called it subcreation, the act of building a secondary world that is, in its own way, as consistent and true as our primary one. And to do this, he did not invent from a void. He looked deeply, with the patient eyes of a naturalist, at the world around him. He took the properties of a real organism, a real substance, and asked a simple, beautiful question. What would this be? What would it feel like, in its most perfect, most essential form? What if its life-giving properties were distilled, not just by hot water in a wanderer's pot, but by the wisdom of an ancient and sleepless people? The answer to that question, born from the cold, hard reality of Iceland moss, was given a name that rings with starlight and hope. He called it Miruvor, the Cordial of Imladris. Let us begin where all things do, in the land itself. We have walked the stark, beautiful landscapes of Iceland. We have felt the chill of the wind coming off the glaciers and seen the steam rise from fissures in the earth. It is a place of immense power and profound quiet, a land that demands resilience from any life that dares to take root upon its volcanic bones. The Iceland moss that thrives there is a direct product of this environment. It is tough, frugal, and packed with the very essence of survival. It has to be. Now let us travel, just for a moment, to another world, yet one that feels strangely familiar. See the Fellowship of the Ring, struggling high on the flank of the mountain Cetraria. The air is thin and viciously cold. A supernatural blizzard, born of malice, seeks to bury them, to freeze the very hope within their hearts. They are a small, warm-blooded company, losing heat, losing strength, losing their will to continue. Their world, in that moment, is reduced to the biting wind, the blinding snow, and the encroaching deadly cold. This is the ultimate expression of the northern wilderness. Tolkien knew so well, a landscape as an active antagonist, and it is here, at the point of utter exhaustion, that Gandalf unslings a small leather flask. Inside is Miruvor, the famed Cordial of Rivendell, the hidden valley of the Elves. He gives a small sip to each of them, and the effect described is not one of brute force, not a sudden jolt of energy. It is something far more subtle and far more profound. A warmth spreads through their limbs, not from the outside in, but from the very core of their being outwards. The memory of the cold recedes, and more than that, their weary hearts are rekindled. They remember laughter and sunlight and the hope of their quest. This is the subcreation. This is the alchemy. To understand the magic, we must first honor the science that served as its blueprint. What happens in our world when a half-frozen traveler, perhaps a Norseman crossing the Highlands centuries ago, finally makes camp and boils a handful of dried Iceland moss in water? The first thing that happens is the release of its core components. Cetraria, islandica, is not moss in the botanical sense, but a lichen, a symbiotic partnership between a fungus and an alga. This partnership creates compounds that neither could produce alone. The most significant of these, from a survival perspective, are its complex carbohydrates, its polysaccharides. Chief among them are two substances with beautifully resonant names, lichen and isolichen. These are not simple sugars that give you a quick, fleeting burst of energy. Think of them instead as a time-release capsule of fuel, engineered by nature for endurance. They are vast, branching molecules of glucose, linked together in a way that our digestive systems must work slowly and patiently to break down. The result is not a spike of energy, but a deep, steady, slow-burning fire ignited in our cellular furnaces. A person consuming a broth of Iceland moss would not feel a sudden jolt. They would feel a gradual, spreading warmth from within as their metabolism was given the high-quality, long-lasting fuel it desperately needed to generate heat and fight off the encroaching cold. The very first effect of Miruvor, that deep internal warmth, is a perfect poetic translation of the real metabolic process of digesting lichen. It is the feeling of your own body being given the resources to save itself. But Tolkien's description goes deeper. Miruvor doesn't just warm the body, it revives the spirit. It brings back memories of summer. Here, the alchemy becomes more intricate. Let us consider the other properties of the lichen broth. Beyond the pure energy, it contains a unique suite of chemical compounds called lichen acids. One of the most prominent in Iceland moss is cetraria acid. These compounds are famously, intensely bitter. To make the lichen palatable, it had to be soaked, sometimes in ash lye, or boiled multiple times to leach out this bitterness. What was left was a thick, gelatinous, and deeply nourishing substance. This process, this careful preparation, turns a harsh, wild thing into a life-sustaining meal. It is an act of knowledge, of craft. The Elves of Rivendell are the ultimate expression of this craft. They are ancient, wise, and their connection to the natural world is absolute. They would not need to boil the lichen multiple times. Their art would allow them to distill its pure, life-giving essence, removing the bitterness and leaving only the good. The Miruvor of the Elves is the idealized form of the lichen broth, all of its strength with none of its harshness. It is nature, perfected by wisdom. And what of the scent, the fragrance that recalled lost summers? Here we enter the subtle world of sensory memory. Take a walk through a dry, sun-drenched forest in our world. Crush a handful of lichen and moss and pine needles. There is a scent that is earthy, complex, and deeply evocative. Our sense of smell is wired directly into the most ancient parts of our brain, the hippocampus and the amygdala, the seats of memory and emotion. A single scent can bypass our conscious thought and unlock a flood of memories and feelings with an immediacy that no other sense can match. The fragrance of Miruvor is this principle, elevated to an art form. The elves who remember the birth of the stars would surely understand how to craft a cordial that held not just the chemical essence of life, but the sensory essence of hope. They would infuse it with the scent of flowers that grew in their hidden valley, flowers that bloomed in an endless summer. The cordial becomes a vessel for memory itself. So when Pippin tastes it, he isn't just getting carbohydrates, he's receiving a direct sensory transmission of warmth, safety, and summer, delivered through the ancient pathway of scent and taste. It is a biological mechanism, the link between smell and memory, presented as a graceful elven magic. It is perhaps the most beautiful example of sub-creation in the entire legendarium. The lichen provides the fuel for the body, the elven craft adds the scent that provides the fuel for the soul. To truly appreciate the unique role of Miruvor, we can situate it within the larger pantry of Middle-earth's life-sustaining substances. It is part of a trinity of provisions, each with its own specific purpose, and each with a fascinating parallel in our own world. First, there is lembas, the elven waybread. This is the primary fuel for the journey. It is described as a thin, light-colored cake, exceedingly nutritious, with a taste like honey. A single small bite can sustain a grown man for a full day of travel. Unlike Miruvor, which is a restorative taken in moments of crisis, lembas is a preventative, a source of daily sustenance. Its real-world parallel is the ultimate trail food. We can think of things like pemmican, the dense mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries used by indigenous peoples of North America, or even the hardtack biscuits of sailors. These are foods designed for maximum caloric density in the smallest, most stable form possible. But lembas, being elven, is more than just calories. It is made from a special grain, grown in sunlight and tended with song, a grain that holds the vitality of the earth itself. It represents an idealized form of agriculture, a perfect synergy between the farmer and the land. It is the embodiment of stored sunlight and fertile earth, baked into a wafer. While Miruvor is the distilled essence of a wild, resilient organism, lembas is the distilled essence of a perfect, cultivated harvest. One is for survival, the other for sustenance. One is a cordial, the other is bread. One warms you when you are about to freeze, the other keeps you walking day after weary day. Then there is the third substance, the strangest and most potent of all, the Ent-Drath. When Merry and Pippin encounter Treebeard, the ancient shepherd of the trees, they are given a drink of this remarkable liquid. It is drawn from stone wells deep in the forest of Fangorn. The taste is indescribable, like the scent of a deep wood, but it is more than a taste. It is a feeling of immense vitality, and it has a startling physical effect. It causes the hobbits to grow, making them taller than any of their kind in recorded history. The Ent-Drath is not merely restorative like Miruvor, or sustaining like Lembas. It is transformative. It is the very water of life, the secret of the forest made liquid. To find its scientific parallel, we must think about the forest as a single, vast, interconnected system. Imagine the rain falling on the canopy of an old-growth forest. It drips from leaf to leaf, runs down bark covered in moss and lichen, and seeps into the deep, rich soil. It filters through layers of humus, past the roots of ancient trees, through the vast, mysterious network of mycelium, the underground fungal internet that connects the entire forest. By the time that water reaches the deep stone wells, it is no longer just H2O. It is a complex infusion, a soup of minerals, phytochemicals, enzymes, hormones, and countless organic compounds released by the roots, the fungi, and the decaying life of the forest floor. It is the forest's own circulatory system, its lifeblood. The Ent-Drath is the poetic ultimate of this concept. It is a drink so saturated with the growth factors, the vitality, and the ancient strength of the forest that it can impart those qualities directly to another living being. It doesn't just feed you, it remakes you, just a little, in the image of the forest itself. It is the wild magic of growth and change, where Miruvor is the quiet magic of endurance. Each of these three substances, Miruvor, Lembas, and the Ent-Drath, represents a different aspect of nature's power. Translated into myth, the Ent-Drath is the power of the whole ecosystem, the forest's essence. Lembas is the power of the cultivated field, the sun and soil captured through perfect agriculture. And Miruvor, our humble Iceland moss, is something else entirely. It is the power of the individual organism in the harshest of places. It is the gift of the pioneer, the survivor, the life that clings to the bare rock and faces the bitter wind, and not only endures but thrives. It is a gift not from a gentle, nurturing land, but from a stark and challenging one. And that is why it is a magic of last resort. It is the hope you find not in a sunny field, but on a frozen mountainside. The elves who made it, living in their hidden valley of Imladris, were themselves survivors of ancient wars and sorrow. They embodied a kind of beautiful, lingering resilience. They were a people of memory, holding on to the light of the past in a world that was growing darker. It is so fitting, then, that their greatest gift to travelers would be a cordial that not only restored the body, but also restored memory. The memory of warmth, of summer, of why the journey was worth undertaking in the first place. When Gandalf gives the Fellowship a sip of Miruvor, he is not just giving them a dose of energy, he is giving them a mouthful of Rivendell. He is sharing a fragment of the elves' own enduring spirit. The Lichen, Cetraria islandica, performs this function in a purely biological way. It provides the literal energy for the body to endure. Miruvor does this, but adds the layer of symbolism that transforms it into something more. It provides the spiritual energy for the heart to endure. This is the genius of subcreation. It is a process of deep listening. It is looking at a humble, crinkled, grey-green lichen on a cold stone and seeing in it not just a collection of cells and chemicals, but a story of symbiosis, of resilience, of the quiet, unassuming strength that allows life to persist against all odds. The magic of Miruvor feels so real, so earned, because its roots are sunk deep into the soil of our own world. The warmth it provides is the echo of a real metabolic fire. The hope it gives is the echo of the real hope a lost traveler feels upon finding a source of life in a barren land. And so the alchemical draft is complete. The process is not one of fiction trumping reality. It is one of reality inspiring a deeper fiction. The humble lichen, through the mind of a master storyteller, becomes the cordial of hope. Its chemical properties become magical effects. Its harsh northern habitat becomes the deadly slopes of a mythical mountain. Its story of survival becomes a pivotal moment in an epic of good versus evil. Tolkien did not need to invent a fantastical plant from nothing. The real world had already provided him with something far better, a real organism whose real properties were already, in their own quiet way, magical. He simply had to pay attention, to see the epic poem written in the language of biochemistry and ecology, and then translate it for the rest of us. He saw the secret of survival held in the body of the lichen, and from it he distilled a single shining drop of hope, and he named it Miruvor. Chapter 6. The Modern Echo. Legacy of a Plant and a Myth. Did not need to invent a fantastical plant from nothing. The real world had already provided him with something far better, a real organism whose real properties were already, in their own quiet way, magical. He simply had to pay attention, to see the epic poem written in the language of biochemistry and ecology, and then translate it for the rest of us. He saw the secret of survival held in the body of the lichen, and from it he distilled a single shining drop of hope, and he named it Miruvor. And a name, once given, is a powerful thing. It does not erase what was there before. It simply adds a new layer, a new lens through which to see. The lichen, Cetraria islandica, did not cease to be itself the moment it was echoed in the pages of a story. It did not lose its own ancient and terrestrial history. Instead, it gained a second life, a life in our imagination. It began to live in two worlds at once, the cold, wind-scoured reality of the Icelandic Highlands and the warm, firelit halls of Rivendell. And so our journey, which has taken us from the microscopic dance of algae and fungi to the slow, patient march of Viking settlers, now arrives in our own time, here in the 21st century. We find ourselves standing at the confluence of these two rivers, the river of science and the river of story, and we find our humble lichen floating serenely at the center of it all, more relevant and more fascinating than ever. Because today, we have tools and techniques that allow us to understand the lichen's magic in a way the old herbalists and storytellers could only guess at. We can look past the folklore and see the molecules. We can translate the ancient whispers of its healing properties into the precise language of chemistry. We have taken the real-world Miruvor, not into the fantasy of Middle-earth, but into the clean, quiet, and equally wondrous world of the modern laboratory. Here, under the focused beam of an electron microscope, or within the sterile glass of a beaker, the lichen's secrets are gently unraveled. The feeling of warmth and renewed vigor that Tolkien's heroes felt, we can now trace its origins. We can see the specific compounds, the elegant and complex molecules that this organism has been perfecting for millennia, not for our benefit, but for its own survival. And in doing so, we don't destroy the magic, we simply give it a new name. We call it biochemistry. Let's begin with the lichen's most famous guardian, a compound with a name that sounds almost poetic in itself: arsenic acid. This is the substance that often gives lichens their pale greenish-yellow tint. It is a crystalline filigree that laces through the fungal threads, a bitter and potent defense system. You can think of it as the lichen's personal in-house apothecary. It is a master pharmacist, working on a microscopic scale. Arsenic acid is a profound antibiotic. It is a quiet, ruthless security guard, standing watch at the cellular gates, turning away harmful bacteria that would seek to invade and decompose this slow-growing life form. For an organism that can live for centuries, exposed to every microbe the wind can carry, such a defense is not a luxury. It is the very foundation of its endurance. When a Viking boiled this lichen into a broth to soothe a chest infection, they were unknowingly creating a crude extraction of this very molecule. They were borrowing the lichen's own shield for themselves. Today, in sterile labs, we do the same, but with far more precision. Researchers fascinated by this natural defense have studied arsenic acid extensively. They have confirmed its power not just against bacteria, but against viruses and other fungi as well. It is a broad-spectrum guardian. This is why you will find extracts of Cetraria islandica in the ingredient list of some throat lozenges and herbal cough syrups. When you feel that soothing relief, you are experiencing the modern echo of that ancient wisdom. You are benefiting from a defense system perfected on a cold rock, somewhere in the North Atlantic, long before humans ever thought to name it. But isonic acid does more. It is also a remarkably effective sunscreen. It absorbs the harsh, unfiltered ultraviolet radiation that beats down on the exposed landscapes where the lichen makes its home. It is a parasol, woven from pure chemistry, protecting the delicate machinery of the algal cells within, ensuring they can continue their quiet work of photosynthesis without being scorched by the sky. This single molecule is both a shield against the invisible threat of microbes and a shield against the overwhelming power of the sun. It is a testament to nature's profound efficiency, a masterclass in multifunctional design, a single substance that is both armor and shade. And then there are the other compounds, the ones that speak less of defense and more of nourishment and comfort. The lichen's body is rich in two unique polysaccharides, long complex chains of sugars called lichenin and isolichenin. These are not the simple quick-burning sugars you might find in a piece of fruit. These are molecules built for the long haul. They are the lichen's pantry, its deep storage of energy, laid down in times of plenty to be drawn upon during the long, dark, frozen months of winter. When you boil Iceland moss, these are the molecules that transform the water. Lichenin dissolves in hot water, but as it cools it forms a thick, gelatinous substance. Isolichenin, on the other hand, creates a similar gel even in cold water. Together they create the soothing, mucilaginous texture that has made this lichen a folk remedy for centuries. This gel, this soft, slippery coating, is what lines a sore throat or calms an irritated stomach. It is a physical balm. It is like a gentle liquid bandage, crafted by the lichen to store its own life force, which we can then borrow to soothe our own ailments. This is the secret behind its modern use in cosmetics and skincare. The same properties that make it a soothing internal medicine make it a wonderful topical agent. That molecular structure, so good at holding water and creating a protective film, is a master hydrator. Lotions and creams infused with extracts of Iceland moss carry that ancient calming intelligence. They bring the resilience of the windswept lava fields to our skin, offering a barrier against dryness, a gentle answer to inflammation. It is a strange and beautiful thought that the same chemistry that allows a living thing to survive being frozen solid for 6 months of the year can also bring a feeling of soft, supple relief to human skin. The legacy of survival is passed on, from the rock to the remedy, from the wild to the washroom. And what of its use as food? The bitterness of the usnic acid, so useful for defense, makes the raw lichen unpalatable. The ancient peoples of the north knew this. They developed slow, patient methods of preparation, soaking the lichen in water, sometimes with wood ash, for days on end. This was a dialogue with the plant. It was a process of asking it to release its bitterness, to let go of its defenses so that its deeper nourishment could be accessed. This process leached out the usnic acid, leaving behind the energy-rich polysaccharides. The result was a meal that was not just food, but a symbol of ingenuity. It was flour for bread, a thickener for stews, a staple of survival in a land that offered few easy calories. Today, this culinary tradition is not merely a memory, it is being rediscovered. In the world of new Nordic cuisine, where chefs forage for ingredients that speak of the local landscape, Iceland moss has found a new, celebrated place on the plate. They are reviving the old ways, but with a modern artistry. They might fry the leached lichen until it becomes a crisp, ethereal garnish that tastes of the earth and the air. They might grind it into a dark, savory flour for breads and crackers, lending a subtle, wild complexity to familiar foods. They might even use its gelling properties to create unique desserts. To eat Iceland moss in one of these modern restaurants is to taste history. It is to consume the landscape itself, to take a piece of the ancient, resilient North Atlantic earth into your own body. The taste is subtle, a little earthy, a little oceanic, a mineral tang that speaks of volcanic rock and clean, cold rain. It is the taste of a place concentrated into a single delicate bite. So you see, the magic of Miruvor was never truly a fiction. It was a poetic translation of a verifiable scientific reality. The warmth, the nourishment, the feeling of renewed life. It is all there, written in the language of molecules. In our modern age, we have simply become fluent in that language. We can isolate the compounds, verify their effects, and concentrate them into products that offer comfort and relief. The lichen's ancient legacy as a healer and a source of strength continues, not in myth, but on the shelves of pharmacies and in the bottles on our nightstands. It is a quiet, humble, and deeply reassuring continuity, a thread of wellness that stretches back from our time, through the sagas, all the way to the first moment that this composite being decided to make a life for itself on a barren stone. And yet, is that all we see? When a traveller stands on a vast moss-covered lava field in Iceland today, a field that stretches to the horizon like a rumpled grey-green blanket, is their first thought of polysaccharides and usinic acid? For some, perhaps, but for millions of others, for a generation raised on a particular story, they see something else entirely. They do not just see an ecosystem, they see a landscape haunted by myth. They see a place that lives in their imagination as vividly as it does on a map. This is the second parallel legacy of our lichen. The cultural echo, the way a fantasy story has reached out from its pages and draped itself over a real place, forever changing the way we see it. And this phenomenon is nowhere more potent than in Iceland. The country's landscape is, in a word, epic. It is a place of brutal and delicate beauty, of fire and ice living in a constant dramatic tension. There are vast, empty plains of black volcanic sand, where the wind blows unimpeded for 100 miles. There are colossal glaciers, tongues of ancient blue ice that carve their way through mountains of ash. There are waterfalls that drop with such force you feel the vibration in your bones. There are geothermal fields where the earth itself breathes steam, where pools of boiling mud bubble and hiss with a primeval energy. It is a landscape that feels elemental, unfinished, as if it were still in the process of being made. And so, when people who have journeyed through Middle-earth in their minds come to this place, they cannot help but see reflections. The stark, treeless plains of black sand around the volcano of Hekla. It is difficult not to think of the plains of Gorgoroth on the doorstep of Mordor. The vast, sweeping green hills dotted with turf-roofed houses. It is so easy to imagine them as the rolling fields of Rohan. The jagged, moss-covered volcanic formations of the Eldron lava field, where our lichen grows in such abundance, they look like the ruins of some ancient troll-haunted fortress. The story becomes a filter, a new layer of meaning laid over the geology and the biology. The tourist who comes to Iceland today is often on a kind of pilgrimage. They are seeking the real-world echo of a place they love. And so, when they kneel down and touch the crisp, leathery surface of Cetraria islandica, they are not just touching a lichen, they are touching a piece of the legend. They are holding a tangible link to the Fellowship's desperate journey. For a moment, that patch of grey-green life ceases to be a symbiotic partnership of a fungus and an alga. It becomes, in their hand and in their mind, Miruvor. They are holding a piece of the story. This has a profound effect. It creates a strange and beautiful symbiosis, not between two organisms, but between a place and a narrative. The tourism industry in Iceland, of course, has recognized this. There are tours that will take you to elf-haunted rocks, to canyons that look like they were carved by giants. The mythology of the Sagas and the modern mythology of Tolkien's world blend together into a potent draw. The story brings people to the place, and the place in turn makes the story feel real. Think of it like a palimpsest, one of those ancient manuscripts where an old text has been scraped away and a new one written over it, but faint traces of the original are still visible beneath. The Icelandic landscape is a palimpsest. The original text is the scientific reality, the geology of plate tectonics, the biology of extremophile organisms like our lichen, the deep history of volcanism and glaciation. This is the foundational truth of the land. But over this, new layers of text have been written. The first was the layer of the Norse myths and the Icelandic sagas, stories of gods and heroes, trolls and hidden folk, that arose from the land itself to explain its strangeness and its power. And now, in our time, a new layer has been inscribed, one written in English by a professor from Oxford, the story of Middle-earth. And all these layers are visible at once. You can stand in a field and appreciate the lichen for its incredible biological resilience, its role in soil formation, its chemical genius. At the same time, you can feel the whisper of the old sagas, the sense of a wild and sentient landscape. And on top of that, you can feel the thrill of standing in a place that feels like it has been lifted from the pages of a beloved book. None of these layers erases the others. They coexist, enriching our experience, making it deeper and more complex. The lichen, Cetraria islandica, sits at the very heart of this. It is both a real functioning part of the ecosystem and a potent cultural symbol. Its dual legacy is a perfect mirror of our own human nature, our capacity for rational, scientific inquiry, and our equally deep need for story, for myth, for meaning. We want to understand how the world works, down to the last molecule, but we also want the world to mean something, to be enchanted, to be filled with the possibility of magic and hope. Our lichen allows us to have both. We can hold its modern reality in one hand, a source of potent biochemicals for our medicine cabinets and a unique flavor for our most adventurous restaurants. And we can hold its mythological echo in the other, a symbol of endurance, a drop of elven hope, a tangible piece of a story that has shaped the imaginations of millions. The two are not in conflict. They are two sides of the same truth, two ways of expressing the same fundamental awe we feel when we look closely at the natural world. The scientist in the lab, carefully analyzing a sample of lichen extract, and the fan, standing on a misty Icelandic hillside, imagining the taste of Miruvor, are, in the end, doing the same thing. They are both paying attention. They are both looking at this humble, overlooked organism and finding in it something extraordinary. One finds it in the elegant structure of a molecule, the other in the resonant power of a well-told story. But the source of the wonder is the same. It is the lichen itself. And so the legacy of this plant and this myth is not just about lozenges or tourism. It is about perception. It is a lesson in how we see the world. A story can teach us to look closer at the reality around us, to see the miraculous in the mundane. Tolkien did not invent a magical plant. He saw the magic that was already there in a real one and gave it a name that helped the rest of us see it too. He taught us that the wild, strange and beautiful landscapes of our own planet are every bit as wondrous as any fantasy realm. We do not need to escape into fiction to find worlds of breathtaking wonder. We simply need to open our eyes to the world we inhabit. The final, modern echo, then, is this: a quiet invitation. An invitation to look at the overlooked, to see the patch of lichen on a park bench, or the moss on a stone wall, not as a simple plant, but as a miniature, ancient city, a collaboration of life that has mastered the art of survival. It's an invitation to see the science behind the folklore and the poetry within the science. The story of Cetraria islandica and Miruvor is a perfect loop. A real plant inspired a fictional one, and now the fictional one inspires us to look back with new eyes and with deeper appreciation at the real one. It is a gift that keeps on giving, a quiet partnership between the patient, slow-growing truth of biology and the soaring, timeless power of the human imagination. And our little lichen, clinging to its rock under the vast northern sky, continues its silent, unhurried existence, indifferent to our stories, yet holding the secrets of them all. It holds the power to heal our bodies with its chemistry, and the power to stir our souls with the myths it has inspired. It is a real plant and a real magic, and it reminds us, as we drift now towards sleep, that the world is far more enchanted than we often allow ourselves to believe. The story is true, not in its details, but in its essence. There is a cordial of hope in the wild places of the world, a strength to be found in the small and the resilient, if we only know where and how to look.